Hi, everyone. Good morning, and welcome to another Sunday morning chat with Karen, our favorite VA, and Janet, and myself. And today's topic is about women supporting women. What does that really look? Do we really support other in and in life in general? Today we have Emily Williams. And let me tell you a little bit about Emily. Give me a second. I have it here on my screen. So, Emily is a DEI expert and she supports women of color to overcome microaggressions and experience psychological safety at work. Emily's worked in more than 20 countries to further equity and inclusion, and with a background in labor and human rights, she advises corporate leaders on the practices and mindsets required to build truly diverse and inclusive organizations. So we think that Emily is more than able to guide this conversation and help us understand what's really going on when we talk about women supporting women. So welcome, Emily.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here with you three.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you
We're
so
happy to have
thank
you.
yes, definitely happy for you to be here in this conversation.
Great. Wonderful.
Okay, so to get us started, I'm going to ask Karen to share one of her experiences where she thought that women didn't do such a good job of supporting her. So, Karen, you want to share your experience and then Emily can talk to it.
Yes. For me, I am a woman of Afro Latino, which means I am Hispanic. I speak Spanish. And then I am looking black, like chocolate sister. But
Mm,
I find that when I come across not all, right, Hispanic women who looks different, standard looking, Spanish women. And I always find that a lot of them don't know that I'm Spanish because they go based on the way that I look.
mhm.
And my experience has been they will talk about me, right, in Spanish, not knowing that I understand what's being said,
Yep.
right? And it's like once I speak Spanish, they'd be like, "Oh, I didn't know you speak Spanish." Right? Oh, I didn't know that so it's like you already said these things about me. So it's like now I feel uncomfortable. So it's like, wow. But the crazy thing is I never had that experience with women that looks like me. Even me speaking Spanish, it was never an issue. It was more like, oh, you speak Spanish, but it's more like intriguing to want to know more about where I'm from. But when
Mhm.
I find women that are Spanish like myself, but necessarily don't look like me, it's a judgmental thing. It's more like discrimination because the way I look.
Mhm.
So that been one of my issues being Afro Latina
Mhm.
woman, I should say.
Mhm.
Dealing with other women within my own culture. That's one of my biggest experience that I had, and I still have it to this day.
Mhm.
So, what do you think about that? You what do
Yeah.
you,
Well, I think, if we're talking about like the context of work, I think there are many ways in which women are kind of pitted against one another, right? And so, we may want to take women as a category to say, well, we should all understand what it means to be a woman, right?
right, right,
But the reality is that that's what it means to be a woman is shaped also by our other identities, right?
right,
So our racial identities, our ethnicity, right? Our citizenship status, right?
right.
Um, our ability, our class background, all of these things, right? So I think, number one, that's why it's so important that we kind of really question this category of woman, right? And what that means, right? Because that means something very different to every person who identifies as a woman.
Right.
Hmm.
I think, the other thing that I'm thinking about, Karen, when you are sharing your experiences is anti Black racism,
Right.
right? So even
Hmm.
among people of color, right,
Mm-hmm.
you find other groups of color who still, subscribe to racism against Black people,
Right.
right? And it sounds to me like that's what's coming up, in those experiences where you've had conversations with other Latinas who perhaps didn't understand that you yourself are Latina, right?
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and so, that's what comes up for me. And I think that that's why when we see things like Black Lives Matter,
Right.
struggles
Hmm.
for racial
Hmm.
equity, racial justice, why those are global struggles, right? Those aren't
Yeah.
in the US, right? But we see
Right.
those
Hmm.
all over the world, right? And
Yeah.
it's for precisely that reason, because there are people of African descent, there are people with black skin everywhere, right?
Right.
Not only in
Exactly.
the US, right? But we still see that kind of racial inequality, in other countries as well, the same way, in very similar ways that we do in the US. Right?
Yeah, that's I agree with you, Emily. That happens a lot, even within our own Spanish. Just talk about colorism, right?
Yep.
That happens a lot, even within own women ethnicity within the African American community. That
Yep.
happens a lot as well.
Yep.
Being a lighter tone or being a darker tone, I think that comes across pretty much in all aspects, right? All
Mhm.
ethnicities, because there is Spanish, Latina women who's fair skinned, and there's some that are my complexion.
Right.
And the same thing with black women. And the same thing, I'm sure, other ethnicities as well.
Hmm.
But for some reason, that seems to be the thing. Colorism. They assume because you look this way, you automatically black.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they don't speak. You don't speak another language, but English. But I think it's part of that have to be also lack of knowledge. Not understanding that, like you just mentioned, they are African American descent women. Within the Spanish
Yeah.
community, other communities.
Hmm.
And a lot of people don't know that, maybe, or maybe many reasons why they might not know that or might not understand that.
I
Yes.
absolutely agree. I do have to apologize right now. I am live streaming from my bed because I have a knee injury. So apologies for my bedroom setup here, and Brewski is here keeping me company. But to your point, Karen, that actually in the workplace, I believe it's workplace culture, and it
Hmm.
comes from the top down.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We
Hmm.
have to take a stand. And if you don't have that set up in your company, your organization, take a stand. Become an advocate and an ally, because it's not okay. One day you could hear a group of women um, talking about another woman of color. One day it could be um, a different group of women talking about, Asian or Caucasian. And we as women, it regardless of our color and background, we have to take a stand. And what I noticed from personal experience, I grew up in the projects. I grew up in low income housing. Not a lot of
Hmm.
people know that's my background. But I don't share that information, but I have experience
Hmm.
with different minorities. And coming into the corporate world, culture, there's a professional way of getting work done to whatever your job task, whatever your job role may be. But then there's a line that gets crossed when you bring in the color card, or you bring in that
Hmm.
racism or microaggression that is so subtle, but it hurts somebody, it triggers somebody. And that's the point, is sometimes people might not know that they are guilty of microaggression, and it has to be stopped in the tracks immediately. So, as an advocate, as an ally, for me, it's something that it needs to be brought into the light. It needs to be made more aware. The conversations need to be more inclusive, to involve people of different backgrounds, to bring it to light. And for me, for Karen, for your sake, that's something that I feel like having these types of conversations, it is super helpful, because what can I do? Or what can my coworker, my Caucasian woman coworker, what can she do to become an ally? What can
Right.
she
Well, I
listen to me?
think, yeah, I think those are really good points, Janet.
Hmm.
And I think a couple of things, number one, kind of both of what Karen said and also you, Janet, that stereotypes are very well in aligned
Mm-hmm.
with the workplace, right? So
Mm-hmm.
what people thinks that it means when they see a woman with black skin, right? Or what they think it means when they realize that someone grew up, living in housing projects, right? So all of those stereotypes are still very present in the workplace. I think
Mm-hmm.
for me, as a coach for women of color in workplaces and a DEI expert, is that we also, as women of color, really need to learn. We don't always know when microaggressions are happening, right? We might feel like, oh, something was off, or that
Right.
just wasn't quite right. but they can
Right.
be so normalized in the workplace that I think the education and the training about microaggressions for us first is really important, right? Because,
Yeah.
what I see oftentimes is that we ignore the impact on our health and well-being, on our
Right.
confidence, right, on our anxiety, right, and then we jump to, okay, well, we have to like create advocates in the workplace, or we have to make change. That's important, we can do that, but we also have to have that step of caring for ourselves first, right? Because
Yeah.
here's a very interesting statistic. Okay, Black women identified work as a place where they experience the most racism, right?
Oh,
So now we think about that, right, as
Mm.
opposed to like, racism in society, perhaps while shopping or with encounters with police, right?
Right.
Black women experience
Mhm.
the most racism at work, right? So, it has become so normalized that we just keep going, right? We think that, like, okay,
Mm.
we only have two options. Either we leave this workplace or we just suffer through it, right?
Right.
And,
Yeah.
you know, one of the things that one of the points that I really make with my coaching clients is that, but no, we have many more options than that. And the first option is tapping into our own power, ensuring
Mm.
that we are okay first, right? And
Mhm.
then we can advocate for change, right? But we do that in tandem as we advocate for improvement in our own situation, right?
Right. That's a good point. That's a good point, Emily, because even at different, I had different employers throughout my lifetime, right? And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, a lot of the times, we have microaggression, but we're not sure it was microaggression.
Mhm.
You
Because
know,
it's subtle. It's very
right?
subtle.
It's very
be-
subtle, so we like, did
yeah.
they just say this to me? But you're
Yeah.
not sure,
Yeah.
so you don't
Yeah.
say nothing because
Mhm.
you don't know whether to go forward
Yeah.
with it, or
Yeah.
you don't have no evidence to prove that this person said this, or they do it in a
Mhm.
sneaky way in the coffee room when nobody's listening to you, or in the bathroom.
100%.
Yeah.
You
Because
know,
100%.
I was going to ask Emily about that
Mhm.
subtlety and how that affects psychological safety at work, because that
Mhm.
builds up. And
Mhm.
you keep wondering, was it or was it not? Do I or do I not
right,
do? And
right,
then that really affects you and how you behave mentally and emotionally at work as well, before
yeah,
we even get to your performance as part of your
100%.
job.
100%. So let me just plug this first. So I'm holding a workshop on microaggressions and how we as women of color can respond in empowered ways on April 12th. So I think we can share a link to that
yeah,
so that everyone listening can sign up and attend that webinar, because we'll be talking, I'll be going through the different kinds of microaggressions and actually how we can respond in empowered ways. Um, but Gail, to get back to what your question about psychological safety and second guessing ourselves, that's exactly what microaggressions do, right? In microaggressions, we've been kind of taught that, like, oh, don't worry about it. It's just words. Ignore that person. It's just how they
It's true.
are. Right?
It
But the
is true. I know it's
reality,
not funny, but it is so true. That's
that's
what
how
they
people
say. It's not
respond.
a big deal. It's not a big deal.
Oh my
It's
god.
Right,
only words.
exactly.
It's nothing.
Exactly.
I'm not
Exactly.
yeah,
I don't have any color or ethnicity background, but my sister's half black. Not a lot of people know
Mhm,
that. But
mhm,
I as an
mhm,
educated human being
mhm,
with red blood and a heart that
mhm,
beats, I see it on TV. I see it with the government
mhm,
and the when
mhm,
they're bringing in new inductees for the Supreme Court. I
mhm,
see it.
mhm,
And
wow,
I'm kind of like, let me double check. Let me hit up one of my sisters right now. Let's see if she thinks the same thing that I'm
Yeah.
thinking.
yeah.
And it's
Mhm.
right,
Well, I
happening
think,
there.
yeah,
yeah,
I think we should talk about that too, because it was, troubling just how public and persistent, like the abuse was in that situation. I mean,
Yes.
I think we have to
Mhm.
just call it what it was. But let me just go back to the microaggressions just quickly, because the thing is, when we're talking about, they're just words, right? Like it shouldn't be a big deal. Well, it actually does in the long run begin to impact our health, right?
Mhm.
It's been linked to heart disease, hypertension, right? Increased levels of anxiety and depression, right? In people of color. So
yeah,
even though they are
Yeah.
words, right, it does leave a lasting impact on us physically, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that that's really important that we kind of shift our thinking about it, right? Because their microaggressions are very serious. Um, yeah, I think, the other thing is that, you know, women of different races experience microaggressions, women in general experience microaggression.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that can be sometimes mistaken for, um, we can experience an individual microaggression, right?
Right.
But then when it's compounded by like our multiple identities, right? And then also structural racism, right, within
Right.
organizations, then we have like a compounded experience, right? And so I think it's important too that we pay attention to those kinds of dynamics at work, especially as women of color, so that we're not, you know, leaving behind any part of our experience at work, right? So when we talk about women as a category, women supporting other women, right? So even women who, you know, perhaps do not consider themselves, or non women of color, right? Or women of color who are able to pass as white, right? It's also important that when we talk about allyship, right, that we also understand that structural racism does exist in the workplace, right? And that is something in addition to gender inequality, right, or sexism that women as a group could experience at work, right?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely.
So I have a question for you, Emily. Have you
Mhm,
found then that when it comes to color, because when we decided on the topic, it wasn't
mhm,
necessarily about color, because
mhm,
I guess we took
mhm,
it for granted most of us are not
mhm.
really Caucasian. But do you find Caucasian women support each other, or women of another culture support each other more than I guess women of color support each other?
We tried together.
Well,
What do you think? How have you found it?
here's a really interesting statistic, and it was done by Lehman and McKinsey, and I believe it's 63% of white people consider themselves allies to women of color in the workplace.
Oh.
However, very few of them have taken actions that would demonstrate their allyship, right? So those actions would look like
Right.
naming bias when they see it, right?
Right.
Those actions would look like advocating for women of color to have opportunities to advance in the workplace, right? So you have people who think that they're allies, right? They consider themselves allies, but when it comes down to the action and actually demonstrating it, then we
Mm-hmm.
see much lower levels of people who are actually participating in allyship,
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
right?
I would love to see that included into the workshop too. How can women, non-colored women, become an actual advocate and ally? What does it take to get there? And
Well,
there's
let's
a lot of women that, myself included, very open to learning and bettering. What can we do to support?
yeah.
I would love that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, yeah, and we do actually, we pair that with the microaggressions webinar, and we do it separately, right? We have separate conversations about that,
Mm-hmm.
because we have a conversation with women of color about microaggressions and the way that we're impacted, and then we also have conversations with, people who want to be allies to women of color, right? Because that's also a different conversation.
Right.
I
Mm-hmm.
think the most important thing about allyship is that, we have to remember, well, I think there are a couple things. One, we are working within a workplace structure, right? Where, it's got all of its biases, right? And, you know, when we live in, a country like the US, right, it's also founded on capitalism, right? Which inherent to which is competition, right? So we're all kind of, sort of taught this notion, right, that we have to be our best, but to be our best means that we're better than others, right?
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
we have to rise to the top as individuals, right? So when we talk about allyship in the workplace, those kinds of notions come up as well, right? Or that those kinds of values and that kind of conditioning comes up as well. So the extent to which that we see ourselves being allies to one another as potentially limiting our own professional opportunities or professional advancement, there's going to be there's likely to be a wedge there, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, that's why I'm really happy to see, all of the research and all of the conversation about toxic work environments, of which hyper competition or a hyper competitive environment is part of toxicity,
Mhm.
because I think that hyper competition also really hinders effective allyship.
That
Yeah.
is a great point. Karen, did you
Yeah.
feel like that could be in reference to your example?
Mhm.
Yes, I really do. Yeah, that's true because I know from my experience, I had supervisors and coworkers, right? When things have happened, they wouldn't say anything. And I'm just sitting there defending myself by myself and trying to, they be
Mhm.
looking like you're the problem, or you didn't do this right, or you're the
Mhm.
issue. But in the meantime, everybody saw what's happening. But when
Yep.
it came time to defend myself, I'm alone in this area by myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's definitely, even when it comes to advances, or you have a certain, or productivity, let's say, right? It's like the
Mhm.
best person who do this get this, and that's when everybody trying to like just step on each other to
Hmm.
get either that promotion or that raise or that incentive, whatever that may be. But I think
Hmm.
that it has, like you just said, Emily, have to be a better way where everybody's not stepping on each other. The
Right.
art productivity is being met. You are
Mhm.
getting your incentive, you are getting that promotion without having to step on someone else to get there.
Exactly.
Because
Exactly.
how great is that? It's good that you get your promotion, but how great would you feel that you have to step on somebody else to get there?
And what
You
actually
know,
happens if you do bring that up to it's brought up to HR? How is it handled? What's fair? And do they actually do anything that
yeah,
Well,
gets
I think it
resolved?
depends too on who is running HR.
right. That
Is it a woman of color running HR? Is it a Caucasian? And it's sad that color kind of is the thread through all of
yeah,
this, and it shouldn't be, but
yeah,
it really is for a lot of us.
It
yeah.
And
is
I
in
It
think
today's
is.
world.
for some females too, it's really a matter of survival. A lot of us are the main breadwinners for our family, and a lot
Mm-hmm.
rides on our jobs when it comes to supporting our families and paying our bills and having someone in our minds that we think are threatening what we
Yeah.
have and could possibly, take it away. And I've seen that happen in like mergers and takeovers where you have people working together for many years, and then all of a sudden is like, who is this person? But they're not sure. No, they're fearful. Am I going to lose my job? And am I going to lose my position? Let me just see how I can make sure that I am the best of the best, and if somebody has to go, it's not going to be me, regardless of who I step on. And that's because there's so much writing on this job that whether I'm a woman of color or not, somebody might be trying to take away. But for a woman of color, it's so much more intense because you
Yeah.
might have somebody not of color who has less capability than I do getting that job
Right.
just
Mm-hmm.
Right.
because.
Yeah. Well, I've been there, Gail, and I think too, it's like, when we think about like women of color and we think about like these systems, right? Like for me, this is like what intersectionality is really about, right? Is like understanding how these systems of oppression really show up, right? We see sexism, we see racism, we see classism in the workplace, right?
Yep.
And, we can't forget that, it's also gender in terms of men and women, right? So when we have white men who are at the majority, hold the majority of, top
Mhm,
leadership positions in the country, right? That's also something to talk about, right? Because then we go down from there in terms of privilege, representation, right?
mhm,
So,
mhm,
that's how, access to whiteness for women who have that, right? That's also then like why we see that white women are almost next in terms of representation, right? Or
Yeah.
mhm,
opportunities, advancement, pay equity, right?
mhm,
So I think that that's important to remember too, because we don't want to only sort of confine the conversation to only women in like is it that women are supporting women or women against women? But then we also have to remember that like what's kind of at the top of the system or what's also in the system is white men,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And then men,
Right.
right? Also men of color have
Right.
access to privilege. So that's the other part of the question too that is there that we shouldn't forget about, right? Because it's not just a matter of, what are women doing to support one another or not, but it's also like what is the system in which we are functioning and trying to thrive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah, that's
definitely.
a very good point, as
Mhm.
Yeah.
well. And the thing is, I know a lot of people say to women, choose your tribe. Make sure you have people in your tribe who are going to support you, who are going to be there for you. And yes, some of us do have really great women in our tribe. And I look at the three of us, the four of us, and yes, we make a great tribe. But then what about the others? And then how
Right.
does your tribe here help you at work? What kind of advice is your tribe giving you? They're telling you, yes, you need to stand up, but don't be afraid if you stand up. There are other consequences you might have to face. How does having a supportive tribe really help you as a woman? Because that's one of the first things people say. Oh
Yeah.
yes, have a tribe. Make sure your tribe. But how does your tribe really work for you?
Yeah.
Right. And anything work related, I almost feel like, ooh, am I allowed to talk about this with my tribe? Or is this like uncharted territories and
Right.
everything has to be work appropriate? And that's why networking is the best thing that women of color, non-colored women can come together here on LinkedIn every Sunday with us
Mhm.
to get the talk
I will drink to
going.
that. I'm gonna drink to
Yes,
Yes,
I would
this is
too.
where you have to be. Emily's webinar in 2 weeks, I want to say, or is it 1.5 weeks or so?
Yeah, week
Sign
from
up.
Yeah,
Tuesday. Week from
That's
Tuesday.
yeah,
where you can go because, yeah, work related tribes, it exists. It is beautiful and it is amazing, but you still feel that, what am I actually allowed to say? Can I say that
yeah,
without getting
Right.
any backlash or getting
yeah.
a target on my back? Or maybe there's I am classified in a higher category. Ooh, she's in the red zone. Watch out for this
Yes,
firecracker.
yeah,
That's why we come
yeah,
here, ladies.
Yeah, well,
No,
that's exactly
yeah.
right. Yeah, and that's, Janet, that's why I have a community for women of color for exactly those reasons. It's called Success and it's all about women of color coming together to support one another, right? Now, I always say nobody should go to HR without a strategy, right? Women of
hmm
color should not go to HR without a strategy. In many cases where women of color are experiencing microaggressions, where they're experiencing toxicity, it's you know more often than not it's coming from their direct supervisors, right? And so even then we need to have strategy on a day-to-day level about how we are interacting in the workplace so that we can protect ourselves, right? So that we can stay on course to accomplish our professional goals. And that's what we do in the community. We provide expert resources and trainings so that we're learning skills we need to be successful, advance our careers. We also have mindset and self care resources, right? Because, you know, usually women come to me when they are, they get a headache before they check their email, right? They feel so sick
hmm
to their stomach that
Mm,
they think about
hmm
going to the office, right?
hmm
Well, I want to prevent us from getting to that place, right? And so that's where the self care and the mindset resources come in, right? And if we can, it's constant work to have to continue to do that reframing about who we are, right? Because we know there are stereotypes at work. We may justly speak up about microaggressions or harassment as we experience it. But then if we encounter gaslighting in the workplace, right, that's going to make us, we're going to have to do a lot of mental and emotional work,
That's a lot of
continue to build
effort. That's a lot
yeah.
of work.
ourselves up,
hmm
right? But when you have a community of women of color who have been there, who know that, right, and who have their goals, right here at the front of their minds, it's easier to do that, right? Because we're all supporting one another to get to that place, right? So just imagine, if you had to take, an incident to HR and you could, send some messages to other women of color in the community and say, hey, this is what I'm doing. Can you just check in with me? Do you have any tips, any advice? And then you go to HR much more empowered, right?
Right.
And you
hmm
know
Yeah.
you're right back to the women and say, hey, this is what happened, right? And then it's like you have immediate
Beautiful.
strategy. Yeah, exactly. And then you have that support right there, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful, Emily, because everybody know HR is there for the company to protect the company, right? And a
It's
lot of
terrifying.
times,
Yes.
yeah, and it's a lot of times we think situations happen at work, or you always have to feel like you always have to prove yourself or prove your skills, and having to prove your competency at work because somebody
Mhm.
above you may think you're not able to complete the task, or they're always micromanaging what you're doing. So I think the community is perfect for anybody that needs that help, that has that ally, that have someone to guide them, that have someone to just walk them through, to know that they're
Yeah,
not by themselves. Because a
exactly.
lot of times, at least on my working on the jobs that I had, when I had experience, I experienced them by myself. And a lot of times I
Mhm.
didn't say anything because when I did make a complaint, nothing happened.
Yep.
Right. So
Yeah,
now you're
it's
looking,
true.
you're the red flag. You're looking like, okay, she's the
Yeah, you're the
problem because
troublemaker.
she's
You're the
complaining to
troublemaker.
HR.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
Mhm.
now you feel alone in this situation. So I think it's great to have a community where you could come to, where you can let your hair down, where you could let out your frustrations, because a lot of us need that. We do need that.
Right.
I
Yeah,
mean,
100%. And I always say, we shouldn't feel as though we have to go through this alone,
yeah,
right?
I
Too many of
agree.
us do because, the treatment of harassment, of toxicity, of bullying, micromanaging at work, it's isolating, right? It is
Yeah,
inherently isolating. But we shouldn't have to go through it alone, and we shouldn't do it alone, right? We should do it with a community. And also, we should see that, the advocating for ourselves and others as part of our leadership, right?
yeah,
Because it, in fact, is.
This is beautiful. I
yeah,
don't Karen, I'm gonna retract your comment for you. I think women shouldn't just sign up because they need it. I think everyone should sign up because it is a necessity.
Yeah.
yeah, definitely.
Regardless if they need that help, regardless if they are a woman of color, if we are human and we really do give you know
Yeah.
what? Excuse
Mhm.
Right.
my French, not gonna say it out loud.
I was afraid you
For
were gonna say it out loud.
women, you know that I
I
speak
know
my
you
rights,
would.
but LinkedIn, we're not on Instagram or TikTok. But all of us, if we really do give a hoot about women rising to the top, I want to see more women CEOs. Period. When it comes
Right.
to men versus women, okay, let's do it the right way. Let's support each other. Caucasian women,
Mhm.
Asian women, black women, Hispanic women, you name it. We all need this because we are one. We are each other's tribe. And if we keep pushing each other down, we keep kicking each other down just to get to that rat race, we're never going to come to that number where men are at right now.
Mhm.
Sorry guys, I
Yeah.
love you guys. Men, you guys are my people too. But here we are and we have to take a stand. If
Yes,
you
I
are
agree with you,
serious about
Janet.
being an advocate, about being an ally, we have to learn the right way to stand up for our women of color.
But what
Yeah.
else are you missing, Janet? I think
What?
it goes back to what Emily was saying earlier, or Karen, I can't remember. It is who you have in a key position to represent and support you. And Emily, I think, talked about HR. I mean, I am somebody who every time I was told HR wanted to see me, I would just break out in a sweat. I don't even know what it
Oh,
was. And I didn't know Emily then. So I'm saying
I
they
didn't know
then
Emily.
would need to be
Yeah.
people, maybe women of color or women of whatever color in positions. This goes back to what you said, Janet, that can really, really move the needle on what happens for other women in an
Yeah.
organization. Karen says HR is there to protect the company. Is that really true? I don't agree. HR is there to be the middle person. They're representing the company, yes, but they're also representing their resources. They are human resources. That's why they're there. And a lot of human resources is women and women of color. Who represents us if not HR? I think, but that's just me. I'm the
In
person
your
who's my
highest
my
power,
deodorant never works when
in your
HR calls me.
highest moment,
It's just
devil
how it
comes
was.
for you. Be
Yes.
careful how you say it. Who said that?
Yes.
You know what I'm trying
Denzel
to say.
Washington to
Yeah,
Will
I
Smith.
will be your Will Smith, but I,
Correct.
as an advocate, as an ally, as a protector, I need to know the
Yeah.
right way to protect instead of running up on stage and physically
Yeah,
abusing
but it is
somebody.
true. So, like, Emily, what do you
Well,
think about that?
well, I think when we go to HR, I think, I think um, in an ideal world, HR would be, kind of a mediator. I think that would
Mhm.
be,
Yes.
I think that's would be ideal. In the case of my clients, in my own experience, that has not been the case,
Right.
right? And I think there's, when we think about the roots of HR and we think about like human resources and how do they maximize the resources of the humans that are in a workplace, it seems like, maybe even the starting point is off a little bit there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I would venture to say. And I think, when we think about the context of anti discrimination in the US, right? You know, discrimination is against the law, right? And so,
Right.
rather than listening to a woman of color when she comes to HR, you know, at the very beginning and say, okay, let's address this problem, right? Let's solve it. Let's figure out what is the root cause. What Karen said is that, and Dan, I think you mentioned this too, that the woman who files the complaint then becomes a target, right? As opposed to actually creating consequences or accountability for someone who is creating a toxic environment for her. Many people will agree that HR's core function is to protect the organization or the company from being sued, right?
Right.
So, that's why it's the significance there is that when women of color come and say, but hey, I was treated this way, it's automatically there's a link to, or people will think about, the discrimination laws and the potential of being sued. And, there's a set of requirements that HR is to follow, right? When someone claims discrimination or that they've been treated a particular way because of their identity. But even those requirements don't often go far enough, and they don't often create solutions for women of color. I mean, that's why, the majority of people who are starting businesses in the US right now are Black women, right? And
Right.
Wow.
it's not because, oh, we just decided we wanted to become entrepreneurs and now is the best time. No, we're fleeing something, right? We're
Oh,
fleeing
Right.
toxic work environments.
oh,
And
I
in
got
some ways
goosebumps.
we can see that as
Yeah.
being pushed out, right? And so, I think we have to look at HR in a way that says, how can we improve here? Things haven't been going quite right, especially when we look at women of color's experiences in the workplace. And that I think is separate from, bashing HR or what have you, but it's
Right.
just to say, how can HR actually function so that
Mm-hmm.
nobody at work is experiencing toxicity, right?
Yeah.
Or so that when there are microaggressions, when there is bullying, when there is harassment, there's actually a constructive solution, right? But
Right.
we so rarely see that coming from HR,
Yeah,
right?
and
That
I think
is
we want to
Yeah.
know that HR
I
is
agree.
authentic. I think that you want to
Mhm.
know that HR person is authentic and they're genuine in their care for you, and they're not interacting with you out of a fear that you might sue them. Because I think when we go to HR initially, it's not to talk about suing or taking legal action. It's
Right.
about, can you help resolve this serious issue that I'm having? But
Right.
in the
Right.
back of their
oh,
mind they're saying, oh my god, I'm going to be sued, like, and that's a whole
Mhm.
different reality. So I think HR is the beginning of the missing link for a lot of us. And I think I'm agreeing with you, Emily. A lot of women, Black women, are starting their own businesses and turning to entrepreneurship because we
I
want to be
did
more in
not.
control. We don't want people to continue to control us and treat us without
I
really
didn't
listening
know
to
that.
us. We don't want, we're tired. I think a
That
lot
Yeah.
of
is
us are
Yeah.
shocking.
tired.
Yeah.
I would love to hear how you actually became an entrepreneur. What actually fueled you? Oh, you're smiling. Did I hit? I hit the right question. And I do apologize. I'm gonna go on mute because Brucey is snoring, and I'm sure you can hear it. So I would love to hear how you became an entrepreneur, Emily.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that question, Janet. So that too is my experience, right? I had been working my dream job. I was, working around the world, doing trainings, campaigns about gender-based violence and harassment at work,
Mhm.
in the workplace, right? So I was on a particular trip where I had been in, multiple countries, giving this training, helping women identify like the source of violence at work, what it looks like in workplaces, and then developing, advocacy strategies, right? Based in policy, and based in education. And, when I got back to my office after that trip, I realized, but wait, this is what I'm experiencing too. I'm experiencing this
Wow.
harassment and this gender based violence in my place of work, right? And so then I had a real moment where I was like, I have to really, walk my talk here,
Mhm.
and so, I decided that I was going to advocate, for myself and others who are experiencing, very similar treatment in my workplace. And it resulted in me filing a claim, and then representing myself with my employer, right?
Oh wow.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll tell you, and I see this with my clients, and I see this with a lot of women. We have this moment when we realize that what we're experiencing is unjust, right? When we realize that we're being unfairly targeted, then we have a choice, right? We can say, all right, I'm going to either try to survive it, or I'm going to just start looking for another job. That's it. Or we can say, you know what? I'm going to advocate here. I'm going to take a stand, and I'm going to try to improve things for myself and others, right? And um, every woman is able to make her own decision, absolutely. But I can say, in that process of advocacy, in my own, in women who I've worked with around the world, in my clients, that experience of advocacy is so empowering, right? So no matter if we're going to go into running our own business, or even if we're going to go into another job, right? Or even if we're going to just transition to being home with our families, right? We want to do that from an empowered place, right? Because we'll have a purpose in whatever we decide to do. And when we go from a place of power, that's very different than when we go from a place of feeling victimized, of feeling beat down, right?
Yeah.
We
Mhm.
can go in and
Mhm.
say, hey, listen, like, I did my best to do my part and to create positive change, right? I did my best to do what I can so that nobody else experiences what I experienced, right?
Mhm.
I did my best to live my values, right? And even sometimes I see that when women of color are advocating in this way, they're often living their company's mission better than the company itself, right?
Mhm.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, these are the kinds of experiences that I think are really core to our leadership, and they also are very character building, right? And then that
Mm,
builds a ton of momentum in whatever we decide to do after we move on from that toxic job.
yeah. That's
Mhm.
powerful, Emily. But let me ask you a question. When I find that when an individual, or say a woman in this case, we talk about women. So if you decide as a woman to become, to become an advocate for other women, right? A
Mhm.
lot of the time, do you find that you are alone in this trail, in this mission, because maybe you did it for yourself, attention, to help yourself, but also to advocate for others. But did any others come along to
I was just
empower
gonna.
that, or were you on your own
In
in
my
this?
I
experience?
was just gonna.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, yes, yes. Excuse me. And I excuse me. Yes, and I feel fortunate in that way. I
Oh, that's
happen to be
good.
working in kind of the social impact, social change policy space. So naturally, there would be, people who would be advocates and allies. But I think core to that is that many people will, and you said this earlier, Karen, people will see how others are being treated, right? And
Yeah.
they know that it's not okay. They may know that it's because of a person's race or because of a person's gender, and they may not say anything until someone else speaks up first, right?
Yeah.
Now, I don't think it should be that way, but I think in many cases it is, right?
Yeah. That's true.
Or people just feel safer in the collective action. And oftentimes the collective action is more effective, right? And we saw that in 2020 when employees came together to
Mhm.
really hold their employers accountable to
Yeah.
making statements
Mhm.
about racial equity, to like actually making progress on diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And so sometimes that just takes one person or a small group of people to start those kinds of actions in the workplace, and then others will come along. Now,
Yeah.
Karen, did I feel alone in doing it? Yeah,
Mm,
because I was a target, right?
right.
So even when I had, you know, others with me, right? It still
Yeah.
impacted me much worse than others,
Mhm.
and that's unfortunate, and that's the injustice of it, right? Because it's so many women of color have that experience, right? And that's
Mhm.
why it's not just about me. That's why it's not just about you,
Right.
any of us.
Right.
About like, but why is this a thing that women of color experience here in the US, in Europe, and a lot of places in the world, right?
Right.
So that's why it's a bigger issue than any one woman of color, right? And it's a bigger issue than just any one workplace, right?
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, it really is. It
Yeah.
really
That is.
is. And I
Well,
think
that's
one of the interesting things, though, for us as women, and I don't know where that message gets lost. It's not that we are not thinking about the company or that we're not interested in the company and how well it does or performing to help it do better. We're just saying this is what's happening in my little circle, and this is how somebody is treating me, and it needs to be addressed before we can
right.
even get to how I'm going to help you make more money, if that makes sense. It's not, we're not doing this because we're against you. We're doing this because if you help me solve it, then I can do so much more for you in this role. But
Well,
it's not seen as that normally.
right. And the reality is, Gail, that in many cases, women of color are like performing very highly. They're contributing a lot to their
Mhm.
organizations. And when they
Mhm.
say, hey, listen, I deserve a promotion, or hey, I'm not going to accept
Mhm.
this poor treatment anymore, that's when they become a target, right?
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
Mhm.
it's not, rarely is it a case, in terms of my clients and my experience is that it's because a woman of color is not performing. It's because she is performing. And there's actually research on this that shows the like life cycle of women of color in organizations. They come in celebrated, right? They do very well, they perform very highly, then they ask for accountability on some level, and then shortly thereafter there's an exit, right?
Yeah.
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 So, it's not,
Mhm.
that's when, and it's often too because when women of color become very visible in an organization, right?
Mhm. And that's what I meant. Yeah. So you're doing, you're going above and beyond, and you're really doing well. And it's not about that. It's about, can you please help me solve this situation?
I've had girlfriends from previous organizations. Well, I call them girlfriends, but they're colleagues at that moment in time that have become my girlfriends, where they have tried to advance in their career and they were not given that promotion. They'd ask, why? Well, you're aggressive. You're
Mhm.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Nancy,
Yeah.
it's a little aggressive. What is aggressive? That
Right.
Right.
she's a
These,
leader.
yep. Yep.
Leader.
And these are the
Yeah.
stereotypes. These are the
Right.
stereotypes that come
Yep.
out. Right.
Mhm.
Exactly. Yeah. And right. Yeah, that's not okay. And that's like a huge red flag. Right.
Yeah. Definitely.
I
Yeah.
say keep being aggressive. Keep leading on. Oh, you're being told you're bossy? Bossy equals, you are holding people accountable to what
Yeah.
they
Mhm.
should be doing. Keep being bossy. That's my
Right.
stance. It's
Yeah.
not okay to not allow somebody to advance in their career because of these labels. And
Mhm.
it it needs to be brought up. It needs to be
Yeah.
brought
And
up.
you mean the perception of a label, because is, am I really being aggressive or am I being assertive? You might see
Right.
it
Right.
as aggressive. I might see it as being assertive. You
Right.
might see it as being bossy. I might see it as being, as holding people accountable. Like, who says what label I should have,
Right.
really?
Well, and this is how our systems of promotion and evaluation are flawed, right?
Mhm.
Because it's like,
Yeah.
oh, one person's bias can really hold back a woman's career. Like that's
Mhm.
not okay.
Yeah.
That's really
It's
not
not
okay.
okay. Mhm.
Yeah. That's true. And I find that if you are a person that stands up for yourself, right, and speak up for yourself, then you'll become where, like you just said, Janet, aggressive. But if you're the person that's very quiet, doesn't say anything, then you're looked over, you're being disrespected, you're getting treated all different kind of ways. But then if you're the person that speak up for yourself, now you're targeted because you're aggressive and you don't know how to speak, and
Right.
they label you so many other things. So it becomes where, okay, so do you want me to speak up? Do I speak up for myself? Because when I do, this happens. I get HR letters. I get this, so many things transpire.
Correct.
So it's
Hmm.
like, so do I speak up or do I not speak up?
Well, and
So
that's
that's
Yeah. Is
terrible
it worth
because
it, Emily? Is it even worth it? What do you think?
well, I think it is.
I don't
right,
think.
But I think you have to have a strategy, and I think you have to have community. Like, I think you should have a coach, right? Like, I mean, and
Hmm.
that's why I do what I do, right? Because, you know, Karen, because that example that you just gave, right? Like that kind of internal conflict then is what contributes to the anxiety,
yeah,
right? And then that prolonged anxiety is what then contributes to like the depression. Like, is anything going to
Hmm.
change in my circumstance? Is there any workplace that's going to be better than this one? I'm going to
right,
encounter this racism and sexism anywhere I go, right?
right,
And so I hate to see women get to that place, right? Like I don't that is what I want, what I want to prevent, right? Because we shouldn't have to experience harm as a result of our work, right?
Right.
Or as a
Yeah.
result of the
Yeah. That is
workplace.
the bottom line. Yes, I
Hmm.
We
agree.
are
yes,
here to support. I would love to see if there's
yeah.
Yeah.
any questions in the chat. If there's
Yeah,
any,
they
Yeah.
are.
yes,
Yeah,
there
because I'm
are.
looking
Yeah.
at the time. I'm
Can we
like,
take some?
Lord,
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, I'm like,
Just
this.
check
I
some
can keep going. You
questions,
want to keep
Karen,
Okay.
going?
and yes.
So, question
So
number one. Here we go. How do you handle a situation where a male counterpart gets paid more than you for the same work? How do you deal with? How does one speak up on it, or do you even speak up on it? Like, what do you do?
Yeah, I'm with someone else in the chat said, yeah, it's always worth it to speak up. I agree with that. Well, listen, let me give it's hard for me to give strategy without knowing more information about a
context.
Right.
particular workplace and a
Hmm.
particular, person and scenario. But I would say that if there's someone who is getting paid, who's doing the same work but getting paid more than you, and they are of a different identity, racial, gender, ability, so on, then that to me would seem to be an inequity in the workplace. And I think if there's an inequity in the workplace, then yeah, I think we have to raise it, and we have to be strategic in how we do that. But absolutely, I think we should
Yeah.
raise that.
And in
Okay.
America,
So,
it's not
so for
illegal.
anybody
Not
that asked that question,
types of
I'm gonna put
conversations.
Emily's community email, no,
Mhm,
website. I'm sorry, in the chat,
mhm,
and you could contact
mhm,
her, and you could
mhm.
have a strategy session with her, have a conversation. Maybe
Yep,
she'll have some nuggets that can help you,
yep,
deal with this particular situation. So I
yep,
just put it in the
yep.
comment for anybody who particularly asked that particular
Thank you.
question.
Yep,
Okay.
absolutely. And
So
people
this,
can also send me a direct message on LinkedIn.
right.
I also stream this to Facebook, so you can send me a direct message, and yeah, we can set up a consultation, or figure out if a strategy session is best or joining the community is best. And then also, of course, I have coaching programs, so we can figure out
Mhm.
what is the best option.
Right. Yeah. This is, if you need, if something that's really bothering you, I think you have someone that's willing to help you. Take that, take that person, walk you through, help you, give you strategies. Things that could help. Things that could better your circumstances. Because nobody want to be where, in a place where, oh my God, I'm getting paid this and this person get paid more, and then maybe the person do less than you do. When it comes to
Yeah.
productivity. So
Hmm.
that.
Right. And I think we have to see this as part of our professional development,
Mm-hmm.
because we're encountering it,
Yeah.
almost
Yeah.
all of us, right? So this has to be part of our professional development and our leadership development, right?
Yeah.
Because,
Hmm.
it's racism and sexism is not going away overnight, right? I mean, I think
Yeah.
things we're seeing positive developments in some areas in terms of as it relates to the culture of work, but we're not totally there just yet. So we have to
Hmm.
find ways of dealing with it.
Somebody
Yeah.
asked another question. This will be the last question, guys. Can you speak up in a situation without coming across as an angry black woman? So, what do you think
Yeah.
as far as speaking up on something? How can you do it without coming up like the label? The
Yeah,
angry.
yeah. I have I support a lot of women in this. And I think first and foremost, we have to be really grounded and affirmed in what we are speaking up about, right? We can't necessarily, control the stereotypes that we will encounter, but we can start from a place where we feel affirmed in what we're asking for and what we're speaking up about. And that's most important.
Yeah, that's important. That's, yeah, definitely. Because a lot of times when you speak up, sometimes when you upset, you already had enough or something, right? And sometimes you'll tend to come off aggressive because you're already so upset. You're already like at your wits' end. You come off like, oh, you yelling at me. But
Right,
maybe it's coming out of frustration because you try to deal with it. You didn't know how. You try to, find the best possible way that makes sense. And sometimes you feel alone. Maybe you don't feel heard. Maybe you feel whoever you're coming to is not solving the problem.
right,
So, you know, that's also a thing that comes. At least that happened to me. When I had enough, I don't say anything, and then I come off sounding aggressive. But that's not my intention.
right. Well, and Karen, and I can relate to that. And, that's why I really encourage women not to wait so long, not to
Yeah,
wait until we're at a breaking point, because I've been there too, you
yeah,
know.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of want to, we want to get out ahead of it if we can, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
we don't want it pent up, right? Because then
yeah,
it is
It's
very,
emotional. It's emotional. And you can
yeah,
never
yeah.
say what
yeah,
you really want to say when you're emotional, because then
It
it's too
loses
late
it.
because you've
Yeah,
waited so long and now it's all built up. And
yeah.
yeah,
then you come
And
over as an angry black woman, really.
yeah.
yeah. Well,
Well, it's easier. It's easier for a company or an organization to make that case at that point.
yeah,
But I also just want to say that it's totally normal and logical that we would that it would take until we're at a breaking point to speak up, because
Hmm.
what we've been talking about this entire time is there's very little support for women of color when it comes to really addressing the inequities, the injustices, right, the toxicity that we experience at work. So when you don't have that support, and when you're in an environment that doesn't encourage you to speak up about those things, of course you're gonna, really kind of mull it over for a while, be unsure for a while, right? So
mm-hmm,
I don't want anyone to feel like, to blame themselves for that, right? Because that's what the environment really promotes and conditions us to do.
Hmm.
So, but there are other ways to go about it, right? So I hope that people really join the webinar. I hope that people join the community.
yeah. I'm
If
good.
people are ready for coaching, I hope that they, reach out about the coaching packages that we have.
Yeah. So we've been here almost an hour, ladies. This is very good
Yeah.
topic. So we're
Mhm.
about to close. Emily, for closing, where can they reach you? Where's your community? Let the people know how I can get in touch to. For those who really want this kind of help, for those who really going through this and feel alone, you don't have to be by yourself. So, so there you go. Where can
Yes,
they reach you?
100%. You don't have to do it alone. You can have support. Join the community. It's success. And so the link is there in the chat and also in the
Hmm.
comments. So definitely join. Also, we have a webinar April 12th, which is a week from Tuesday. And that's all about identifying microaggressions in the workplace and how we can respond in empowered ways. And that is for women of color. So absolutely join that webinar. And then reach out to me directly if you want to set up a strategy session or set up coaching. And you can send me a direct message either on Facebook, which is Emily Raquel, Raquel. Or you can also send me a direct message on LinkedIn, which is you can find me at Emily R. Williams.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, kids, any gentlemen listening, there you have it. So thank you for watching today's live. It was a very great conversation, very interesting. So
Thank
I
you,
I
Emily.
think any last words, anybody, before we close?
No, I thought this was a really great
No, it
conversation.
was.
Thanks, Emily, for coming. I don't know if we
Thank
need to
you,
have a
thank you,
part
thank
two
you.
because I'm sure people had other questions that weren't answered. But
Yeah,
yeah, thank you for giving us a lot of food for thought as well.
yeah,
Yeah, and
definitely.
thank you all for, I mean, these were great questions and a great topic. And I'm really happy that you all hosted this conversation. So thank you for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
You're welcome.
So there goes in the chat in the comments. There are the links for the webinar coming up and to her website. So look it up. Any questions as well? put it in the comments. If I don't answer, somebody will answer. If I don't know it,
Mm-hmm.
I'll pass it on to Emily.
And
Thank you,
join us next
everybody.
Sunday for our next Sunday
Yes,
session
next
chat.
Right.
Sunday
Yeah.
again.
If you're
Next
not on
Sunday.
LinkedIn, get on LinkedIn
Yes.
and join
See you
us.
then. Okay.